Hi everyone, this is Joe Kral, President of the Society of St. Sebastian, and again, welcome to Pro-Life University. This week we're gonna really kind of explore some tragic things that are happening in Virginia legislatively. We're gonna talk a little bit about two bills that have passed recently, one in the House and one in the Senate. They're virtually identical, but they've been repealing pro-life laws. So, for example, these bills have repealed the physician-only requirement regarding abortions, that only physicians may do abortions. And on top of it, they've also repealed the waiting period and the ultrasound requirement in their informed consent law. And we're going to go back, we're going to explore a little bit about this and talk a little bit about this. You may recall some time ago I did a video on informed consent, women's right to know legislation, what it means and so forth. So if you haven't seen that video, and if you get an opportunity, I would certainly recommend that you go back and check out that video as well. But let me just simply start off by saying this. This is a real tragedy, and we got to understand why this is bad public policy. And we need to really kind of get into the roots of the issue here. And the reason why I say that is primarily because I think we all understand that somehow, some way, with the repeal of these types of laws, in many ways, it's going to be harmful. You know, unborn children's lives are put more at risk and so forth. But I think to some extent, we need to go back and we need to understand just why this is a bad public policy. And let's go back to just some really simple basic 101 ethics, legal theory here, if you will, especially the relationship between the civil law and morality. In many respects, the pro-life movement adheres to what is typically called the natural law ethic. The idea that there are actual virtues that exist, such as justice, temperance, fortitude, and prudence, obviously. And in many ways, laws are meant to promote these virtues. This is something that comes from Aristotle. Aristotle talks a lot about this in his Nicomachean Ethics. Certainly Aquinas, who furthers Aristotle's philosophy, the great Christian philosopher Thomas Aquinas in his Summa Theologica, where he also talks about how law is meant to promote virtue, and it's for the common good. In many ways, this is one of the things that we fight for as a pro-life ethic, because we understand that justice is in play here for the unborn child, and that people have to act justly towards the unborn child. That's why we seek pro-life laws that are, obviously limiting the various harms of Roe v. Wade. And obviously our ultimate goal is to ultimately overturn the doctrine of Roe v. Wade and to have abortion be illegal all around throughout obviously throughout the 50 states of America. But let me go back here, because in many ways what we're seeing here is some really unjust sorts of things that are going on. And first, let's cover the ultrasound portion of the law that's being repealed, or at least it's going through the process of being repealed in Virginia. This is starkly dangerous here. One of the things, and as I said in a previous video of mine, we talked about this idea of ultrasound and women's right to know legislation in general. But we've got to understand it's important to give women information. And one of the other landmark decisions in abortion jurisprudence, in Casey versus Planned Parenthood, which came out in the early 90s, it was clear, the Supreme Court agreed that a state can pass legislation. They definitely saw that the state had the duty, or even the right, if you will, to inform women, and that women actually had the right to be informed of things such as fetal development, alternatives to abortion, and even a waiting period in order to be able to digest this information. And many states, as a result of that decision, have passed women's right to know laws across the country. And obviously, what we're seeing here is a repeal of this sort of thing. Now, when we look at the ultrasound specifically, this goes to the very idea about fetal development, in particular, her unborn child's fetal development. And I think that's very important here, because obviously she can look at pictures, scientific pictures that accurately portray, the various gestational ages of unborn children. But here she has the ability in real time to really see her unborn child. And I think that's important. And in many ways, what's happening is that abortion advocates and legislators that are abortion advocates are stripping away, if you will, that right of the woman. We really have the duty to provide her with the proper information that this is her unborn child, and that this sonogram shows her unborn child. She has the right, and we have the obligation to ensure that she is able to see that unborn child. And that's why legislation like this is passed. But here what we see is Virginia legislators sort of dismissing that very real notion. And it's tragic and it's sad, because it denies this woman her true rights. It denies her proper informed consent. We know that looking at ultrasound can save lives. I mean, for example, you can go talk to Abby Johnson. One of the big reasons why she became pro-life is because she saw an ultrasound abortion, and she saw what was going on. It radically changed her mind about everything. So ultrasound certainly can play a highly important role in current women's right to know legislation. And that's why you see a lot of states that are trying to pass these sorts of laws, because they understand that the woman, in many respects, needs to be able to see, in real time, her unborn child. And again, what we are seeing here is Virginia legislators that are denying that very real thing. They're denying that reality to the woman. Now, we can talk about the waiting period too, and I'll talk about that briefly. We got to understand that in many respects, the whole idea of a waiting period is to give people time to digest the information. People typically don't go into a surgery and schedule it the same day. That just doesn't normally happen. Because, the doctor provides you with information, they give you more information, they give you time to get a second opinion if you want a second opinion, and so forth. This is a decision that comes down, and they give you time to sit there and think about it before you go in and actually do it. So the waiting period is meant for her to be able to digest that information. And again, what we're seeing here is, in many respects, abortion advocates in the legislature, basically doing the work of the abortion industry and allowing the abortion industry to basically go into, obviously highly immoral selling practices. The abortion industry isn't about the woman. They don't have the best interest of the woman in mind. Their sole purpose is to sell abortions. And so what we see here is, by stripping away this waiting period, it further basically what it comes down to is that women can be further victimized by the abortion industry because they don't have time to go over this information. The abortion industry is there to confuse women when it comes to actual abortion, what's actually going on, and so forth. They're there to sell an abortion. It's a purely profit motive for them. And so, again, it's wrong by stripping away this waiting period. One of the very tragic things that I think that we desperately also need to talk about is stripping away the physician-only requirement. And that ought to be scary to anybody. One of the things that, doctors obviously have to do, and especially those doctors that specialize, is they have to go through extensive medical training in order to perform their specialty. And let's be perfectly honest, all right? We don't expect physician assistants. We don't expect, nurse practitioners or nurses in general to perform invasive surgical procedures. they're not the prime operators. They're usually surrounded by doctors who have the competence because they have the medical degree, they have the specialty training, and so forth. They know what to do in those sorts of medical emergency if something were to happen. And so in many ways, by stripping this away, it's rather scary because basically the state of Virginia, if they do repeal these laws and the law is now no longer, the law of Virginia, the simple fact is you're putting women at severe risk here. And that's tragic in many ways because, non-physicians don't need to be doing this sort of thing. That puts more women at risk. That means more lives are at risk. It's not just the unborn's life that we have to be concerned about as well. We have to be concerned about the woman's life as well. I mean, the simple fact is even though the woman who's going in for the abortion is still made in the image and likeness of God, and she still deserves respect. And so we still have to sit there and care for her and certainly have a concern for her as well. And the simple fact is if you're having non-physicians perform these sorts of things, many tragedies can happen. And so that's really kind of a scary sort of thing. Now, one of the big questions is why is Virginia doing this? And I think to some extent we can look at, for example, what happened last year in Virginia, early last year. We all remember that the Governor Ralph Northam, basically declared he was talking about his support for a bill that would allow abortion to take place up till birth. And again, I think in many ways what is happening in the legislature is if they can't repeal all the pro-life laws at once to make abortion legal up till birth, what they're going to do is they're going to try to reverse incremental their legislation. They're going to try to chip away at it piece by piece and repeal the various pro-life laws that have been happening or that have taken place in Virginia over the last few decades. And again, I think we as pro-lifers have got to be very vigilant. We got to get out there. We got to educate legislators on how this is dangerous, why this is dangerous, and so forth. And we got to understand that ultimately, the civil law, the law of mankind, the laws that are in the law books, and they have to mirror the moral law, because if they don't, it's a short road to chaos. Law is meant to help promote virtue, to help people to be more just, to help people be more temperate, to help people be more prudent, to help people be even more courageous in some ways, to stand up for what's morally right. And if we're not going to do that, we can see the problems that arise. The simple fact is if we're not going to sit there and properly inform women of the, of real-time fetal development of their own unborn child, if we're not going to even allow them to have a waiting period to even go over the rest of the information, we're not really treating them in a just manner. We're not treating them as they ought to be treated. And so we're building up a sort of viciousness, if you will. And if we can't expect them to if we're going to allow this sort of thing to happen, in many ways we can expect more bad things to happen. I know a lot of people talk about, we don't want to get into the slippery slope argument, but in my opinion, and certainly as someone who studies and writes about issues dealing in legal philosophy, that's a real concern of mine because bad habits create vice. And if the law is going to allow for bad habits to continue in an abortion industry, it's just going to create even worse habits in the abortion industry. The simple fact is the abortion industry is already riddled with vicious habits. You're just going to make it worse by repealing these laws, so to speak. And you're going to put women in danger. And, on top of it, obviously children are going to be killed and destroyed. And that's just wrong as well. Well, let's definitely pray for Virginia And let's pray that they can defeat these laws. And I certainly urge all the people that watch this to, if you do live in Virginia, make sure you call your House member, you call your state senator, and you let them know that you don't want the pro-life laws to be repealed. Let's pray for our friends at the Virginia Society for Human Life, who are working very hard to ensure that these bills are defeated. Again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to post a question below in the comment section. Give us a big thumbs up as always. And again, guys, if you can, subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate it. Again, I look forward to our video next week, and I hope you all have a blessed weekend. God bless.